On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Foundation for the Carolinas, inspiring philanthropy and empowering individuals to create a better community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte-Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
I think what matters to me is being able to know that things I do intentionally. I teach with everything I've got intentionally. I don't do it by accident. I don't say, oh my goodness, I had a good class today. Boy, whatever I did, I've got to do it again. No, this is all intentional. No more of this sitting on the water like a leaf and going wherever the water takes me, and then every now and then I come up with a great idea to cheat the cosmos and I do something. No, I didn't like living like that. I like being able to say, I am the master of my fate.
Don Taylor is an assistant professor of sociology at Johnson & Wales University. He has worked in various human services positions, including the fields of mental health, child welfare, couples and families, and domestic and sexual violence. He has written a group treatment curriculum entitled S.E.E.D, Self-Esteem and Expression Development for African-American Adolescents. Don is author of the novel Buggin, A Brother's Tale, and he is an accomplished jazz saxophonist. In this episode, we explore his interest in sociology, writing, and music, his defining years in college, his career, and the importance of intention. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Welcome, Don.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
Don, you are a novelist and a musician and a professor of sociology. Which one of those comes first in how you think of yourself?
The professor of sociology, I honestly believe, comes first. Followed close second, though, by the novelist and then the musician.
Well, we will take those in turn.
Okay.
What exactly is sociology?
Sociology is a systematic study of humans in their environment, the macro and micro levels of engagement from an individual place, from an institutional place, and discuss how society deals with the consequence of difference.
On the first day of class, when you explain sociology to your students, what do you say?
It's a field where it has a language of its own, it has concept of its own, but mostly is focused on how individuals and institutions interact with each other. And I want students to see the different agents that impact each of us and how we see the world from where we stand. How might the world be different when student A looks at the world, when student B looks at the world? That may be based on gender, it may be based on race, it may be based on class, it might be based on religious affiliation, and yet we're looking at the same picture and we see something different.
What courses do you teach?
Introduction to Sociology is the floor course, but I also teach sociology of digital environments, sociology and the culture of Africa, sociology, social inequality, and I also teach sociology of deviant behavior.
How do those courses differ?
The intro course kind of sets the table, and a lot of the concepts that I'm going to talk about in the other courses flow from the intro course. And so as a result of that, we have these questions where we'll see something happen and folks will say, why did he or she do that? Usually a deviant act. How does that come about? Is that person just mentally ill, or is there something more to that? And so it's connecting all these concepts to be able to see how these different areas of sociology pretty much use the same language to talk about some of the same issues on an institutional and personal basis, and at the same time begin to stretch their view to see what's out there.
I took a sociology class a long time ago, Don, and I remember being introduced to all these different institutions, family, community, nation, and wondering about how much personal agency I had at the end of the day. What is that tension between understanding all of these sociological forces and our own ability to navigate that and make choices that are independent from the institutions that we operate within?
Wow, great question. And actually, that is really the crux of sociology to begin with. Because we're looking at all these institutions and all the things that are designed to make sure we conform and we do what is expected of us, be that because due to gender, race, class, etc., it becomes very difficult to begin to think, well, where do I make decisions which are my decisions alone? And so a lot of times what I want to be able to do is to help students look at choices that they make within the institutional belief system that they have. What do I believe? And yet, how do I do something different? Because these institutions are extremely strong. We're battered on all sides by expectations of us from the community at large, from our families, from our peer groups, from friends, from social media. We just really are battered, and it takes quite a bit of strength to stand up in the middle of that maelstrom and make a decision about what I'm going to do to move my life forward.
If people saw you teach, what would they see?
I think most of the time when people see me teach, it's this whirlwind. My wife calls it, she said, you look like the Tasmanian devil. You're in the room and just whirling around. I take great pleasure in watching these students work together without me being in the middle, giving only my opinion. And of course, all of them saying, yep, I agree. But to watch them work it out and for me to go from table to table and just be absorbed in them working with each other, I think that what folks would see would be someone who is really married to the idea of student engagement, married to the idea of simply facilitating a discussion rather than leading a discussion. Something happens to me when the bell rings, so to speak, and I'm not sure how to explain it. I may be tired. I may have had a long day. I may have not feeling it that day. But those students come in the room and they sit there and I look at the clock and it's showtime. And it's like a switch goes off in my head. And I write, this is what we're going to talk about on the board today. And something happens, and I don't know how to explain. I know frequently I said to my wife, I said, the teaching guys were good to me today. And I feel like how sometimes I wish I had been when I was in college. You know, a little bit more forthright, a little bit more open about what I was thinking and feeling. And I want to push them to do that. And it's almost like I get a second chance to do that. But this time, I'm standing up front. And it is so exciting. And it's, by the end of class, I'm tired, but it's that good tired that, man, some good work got done here today.
Of all the subjects that you could teach, why are you drawn to sociology? Sociology
really strikes me where I live. I truly enjoy being human. I do. I enjoy being a human being and being a part of this craziness and this big world that we're in and all the experiences that I have a chance to see, or those experiences I don't necessarily get to see, but I know people who have experienced that and they share that with me. And sociology gives me a chance to do that in a way that I couldn't do it in any other field. When I was in college and I asked, well, what is sociology? One of my very earliest professors said to me, it is a field where you can get paid watching what people do. That was the clearest explanation. It took a while to learn some of the concepts that I needed to learn, but I fully connected to that because even then I was a people watcher. And it was really exciting to be in class. In fact, one of my professors one day said, it's fun to watch where you students choose to sit before I tell you where your seats are. Because in those days, they still had assigned seats. Well, today, I use that exact same statement. And I add to it that as I walk down the hall, I see some of you in other classes. And human nature being human nature, many of you sit about in the same place in every class. If you're a wall sitter, you're probably a wall sitter somewhere else. So that's the excitement of being in the field and looking around and seeing what's going on.
Don, what do you hope your students learn in your sociology classes?
That underneath it all, they're good people. I want them to know they're good people. You may have some ideas that don't jive with what you think people would like to hear. But underneath it all, doggone it, you're a good person. That most of the time, you're going to make decisions that are towards the arc of justice rather than the decisions which are against the arc of justice. And as a result of that, now that you understand and you sit in a room with other folks and you're pushed to talk with people you might not normally speak with, you're forced to challenge some of the stereotypes that you've had. And how do we do that? How do I allow myself to learn about someone that I normally wouldn't speak to? And it only enhances your humanity. And you can't be less than when you're more than. And I've said this to students over and over again. You just simply cannot be. I want my students to feel more than. I want them to walk out of the classroom and say, wow, man, what a good class we had in there today. And when they'll come up to me and say, Professor, this was really good. Professor, this is really good. And I see some of the students who may not necessarily come up. And I just are watching their eyes to see, what do their eyes tell me? I am just so excited for them. And as a result of that, I get to touch a future I'll never live in. What a treat.
Don, in addition to being a professor of sociology, you are also a writer. In 2014, you published a novel called Buggin, A Brother's Tale. What's the novel about?
Obsession, narcissism, all the good stuff that I just sat here and told you has no place in our sociological world. But it really is a book that, to be truthful, it originally started as me doing a journal as my first marriage was starting to break down. I started writing my thoughts down. But after a while, I started just writing stuff that really had no basis in fact at all. And I just decided I need to give this a character because it's not really all me. Some of it is me, of course, but it's not really me. And as I began to write, I just felt like, wow, I started getting more characters. I started getting more stories. And there were times, Mark, that I would go into my room and shut the door and start writing. And it was like they were all sitting there. But it's about basically a man navigating through the world of love and dealing with gender war, and obsession is caught up with a woman that he was involved with. At the same time, someone else sees her as a prize. And how do you navigate that as a man? And what are the issues? And I wanted to hit some of the issues that are important to me in terms of manhood, violence towards women, and violence, what we call quotidian violence. This idea that what we do to women is that's what women deserve. That's how we see women. They know that. They expect that. And I wanted to somehow bring that in to the writing. And so I have a character that carries some of this. And while no character is 100% bad or 100% good, I want to spread it out to talk about what those quotidian cruelties could be. These things that we do and say about women that for some men, you don't even think is bad. What's wrong with that? I don't understand what the problem is. And yet, from a woman's point of view, wow, this is not working for me.
I found a comment posted on Amazon by a reader of your book. Quote, "The book had a lot of flavor. I love the way the author incorporated old school jazz, sex, and suspense. I grooved, laughed, moaned, groaned, gasped, and had aha moments while reading the book. I hope there is a sequel." What do you make of that?
Wow. Yeah, I do think I remember reading that, and I was thinking it motivated me to start working on a sequel. It did motivate me to start, so I have begun the sequel. And I just felt so moved by the review because I really put a lot of that kind of stuff in there to give the book some character, some richness. But I do think that it's important that as for a man's point of view, how do we look at love? How do we see a breakdown? Do men cry about a loss? Do men feel bad about something not working out? And the short answer is yeah. And so for some of the book signings I've been to, that was probably the number one question. That I would go there and folks would say, do men really get so upset that they would throw a wine glass in the sink and break it? I said, yeah, absolutely. This is a man at this point in reading that passage where he's recognizing, what was I thinking?
Don, you are also a musician. You play the saxophone. Mm-hmm. You are self-taught. Tell me about how that came about.
Playing music, when I'm playing, I'm teleported. I am out there somewhere. When I play in clubs or play in somewhere, I feel like I'm actually above the crowd. I'm just, wow. And folks are listening. They seem to be enjoying it. They seem to be connected to the sound. And it's just a feeling of just, wow, I can put a lot of me. That same energy I use in my classroom, I can push it through the horn. And by the time the set is over, I can feel, wow, this felt really good. And especially when I get callbacks and it's, man, you need to come back and play again. You need to come back and play. It's just a feeling of just being able to release myself into something that goes on and on because the notes play forever. They just play forever. And when I'm playing, it's just a feeling I don't have to think about it anymore. I'm not at a place where I have to think it through. I can just play. And if I make a mistake, the idea is that I don't have to stop and fix it. I can play over it and keep going. And I listen to a lot of the masters and how they play, and I try to emulate some of their technique so that I can use it and call upon it when I need it. But the music just really, when I'm playing by myself, that's one thing. When I'm playing with a band, that's another thing. To have 4 or 5 musicians around me and we're all moving in the same direction. And it's like nirvana. It's like, wow, the drummer's going, the bass is going, the keys are working, the guitar is strumming, and the horn is blasting. And it's like, how can there be anything better than that?
Don, I had a friend in college who asked me once, what is the song that I want to be hearing when the final lights go out? What is the song or music or album that you would want to hear as your last song that you're listening to?
Cannonball Adderley's Something Else. I would love that album to be playing just as the lights go out. It is such a mix of ballads and up-tempo stuff, and it just all works together in such a way that by the time you get to the end of the album, it just feels like you've had a wonderful ride.
Don, you were born in Charlestown, West Virginia. What do you remember about that town?
Well, when you think about remembering, and this is one of those things, because I'm not sure it's a memory or if it's from going back there as I got older from time to time, about how small and closed it was. The church that we attended was all either the Taylors or my mother's side, the Jacksons. So everybody that was there, pretty much I was related to on some level. And ideas, I think, just seemed to just float around the family the same way. It got very circular. This is how we do things. This is what we're about. As I got older, and some of my cousins began to move out to different places, and then we came back. It was very different. But Charlestown, I think, if I had to think of a memory, it was just safe when I was there.
It's a town of less than 5,000 people.
Right.
Did your family go back generations?
Let's see. My grandfather, as far back as my grandfather, of course, is the son of a slave. And we went back just recently. As a matter of fact, probably about a year ago, my father took me on a ride back through the plantation where my great-grandfather used to work. And I was just flabbergasted. And I was like, why haven't we done this before? I looked at the fields out there. He said, this is where your grandfather used to run across this field to come home. And I was like, really? And I said, park, stop. Let me get out. And can I just touch the grass? Can I stand there for a moment? And, my grandmother and my grandfather getting their house always felt like we're here. And they had a house that probably, I'll be honest with you, couldn't have been much bigger than all these tables stacked up. Very small place, heated with coal that we used to have to shovel when we were there. But it felt safe, and it felt a place that I can still hear to this day. My grandfather would walk down the street, he'd carry his cane, and he would whistle, walking down the street. And one time I walked with him, and one of the store owners came up and said, "Hey, boy, how you doing?" And I was just shocked. And I looked up at my grandfather, and he said, "Well, I'm doing good today, sir." And I was thinking to myself, wait a minute. And we were walking along, and then he said, "Anything you want to ask me?" I said, "Yeah, I do. Why'd you let him call you boy?" He said, "I ain't let him do nothing. He was going to do that anyway." He said, "And I want you to remember this. Sometimes there's no point in changing something that doesn't want to be changed." Well, I've lived long enough now to know that's probably not the best advice I could have gotten. But coming from him at the time that he had lived, I can see it and I can understand it. Then lastly was the place where I was born. I was a sickly baby, and my father took me to the place where I came into the world. And he said, they'd put you in the basement, and they had all these tubes. I still have the marks in my arms from it. And he said, they had all these tubes coming out of you, and nobody came to check on you. He said, and he went ballistic. And his mother, my grandmother, came in, and they told her that, well, your mother, she's young. Colored women have a lot of babies, so don't worry about it. Let them go. You can get another one. Then my grandmother said, no way. No way. And the legend is that she went in and prayed over me all night. And the next morning when she came out, I drank milk for the first time. And, and it's been a legend in the family. Every time we went down there, I would hear the legend again. They would say that you were dead. You were done. I'm still standing. And again, it only adds to, Mark, this feeling of here I am. And as a result of being here, I have grandchildren. And it's like, here's a time for me to recognize I am really a part of this place. Whatever this is, I'm here. All right. And so it's been a heck of an experience for me.
Do you still feel those prayers over you?
Yep. Yep. There were times, Mark, when I first got to Charlotte, I was here by myself. And there were times when I was just scared that things weren't going to work out. And I just remember one time when I called my father about that because I said, I think Grandma came to visit me. I was sitting in bed and I was just feeling lonely and I didn't know anybody. I didn't know the town that well and things just weren't seeming to take off the way I was hoping they would. I just remember her humming. That was what I remember. I told him that. He said, do you remember what she was humming? I said, yeah, Amazing Grace. And to this day, when I play, I never play without playing that tune. Every time I play my horn, I play that tune. And it is my tribute to my grandmother and my mother, because my mother hummed that a lot. And I learned it on both the horns. And the idea is that I will never take the horn out of my mouth without having played that tune.
Was Charlestown a segregated town?
Yes. It was very clear where black people lived. In fact, they called it Dog Town. My dad told me once it's because there were always a lot of loose dogs running around. I don't remember seeing that many loose dogs. Maybe when he was young, it may have been. But it was very clear where we were and where they were. And even to this day, as you ride through, you can see while there's been quite a bit of development and it looks a lot better, it's clear that historically you can see something looking at the architecture.
Were you conscious of that as a child?
Not really. Not really. I would hear about it from some of my cousins that lived there. And they would say, oh, we can't go in there. And I was like, why not? Of course, by then I was a Philadelphian. And it's like, we can go anywhere we want to go, Well, we can't go in there, Donnie. And stuff like that. Or go in, and I remember one time I put my money up for a dill pickle or something. And the guy behind the counter took it and was doing other stuff. And we were walking. He said, hey, you didn't pay for that. I said, yes, I did. You took my money. Yes. And my cousin walked up to the counter and said, we're sorry. And he put the dime up there on the counter, whatever it was. I was like, now we paid twice. That's stupid. And they just took me out of the store. And I talked to my mom about it. My mom said, well, there's some people that want to cause trouble simply because of the color of your skin. And you have to come to grips with understanding that's what this was about. And it was just little things like that didn't make sense to me. But now it does. Makes a lot of sense.
Charlestown is where the great abolitionist John Brown was tried and convicted during the Civil War.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is the claim to fame, and with Harper's Ferry being right down the road and the big battle, and it feels good sometimes to see that and say, yeah, here he was right here. You look at the courthouse where it was, and it's still standing.
How would you describe your childhood?
Pretty safe, actually. One thing I do remember probably the most is as the civil rights movement was happening and it was televised, we had that little 9-inch or 12-inch TV, whatever it was. And my father used to make us watch what was going on. And I remember my mother would say sometimes, that's enough. And he would say, no, it's not enough. They need to see what's going on out there. And then, of course, being in Philly and transferring to a new school, which was brand new and all that, there was some angst about how we're going to be treated when we get there. But, we always knew we weren't in Birmingham. We weren't, this is Philadelphia. And so there were some things that happened, but nothing of any real consequence. And so I think that growing up, I really don't remember being afraid of anything, or all our neighbors. We all lived on the street with row houses, and the memories I have of the games we played outside and the things are pretty solid.
You did move to Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
How old were you when you moved to Philly?
I think I was like 4, maybe something like that, 4 or 5.
As you grew older, as you became a teenager in Philadelphia, What was important to you as a teenager?
Girls. I'm going to tell you, I was always awkward with girls, and I always wanted to be smoother. I would watch the older guys in the neighborhood, and they used to sing on the corners or on the stoops or things like that. And the girls would all be around and would be oohing and ahhing, and I wanted to learn how to do that. How do you do that? How do you get smooth enough and confident enough to be able to do that? And I was crazy in love with a young lady at the time who probably didn't even know I existed. One of those unrequited type things. But that was important to me. Sports never really clicked with me that much. I played sports because I was getting bigger and stronger, but it never really clicked with me. It wasn't until I went to college that I found what really worked for me and what made me feel like, man, this is the bomb. I'm digging this. And that was the drama club. And I've gone to the drama club following a girl. And one of the young ladies and the Edith Scott Bagley, who was Dr. King's sister-in-law, Coretta Scott King's sister, was our theater director. And I was talking to her, the young lady, and Mrs. Bagley said, "Who is talking in here?" And I just raised my hand. That was me. She said, "I like your voice. Come down here." And I came down and she said, "Read this." I was there ever since.
You're still in the drama club, Don.
Yeah, too much drama.
Don, you went to Cheyney State College, which is the oldest HBCU in the nation.
Right.
What do you remember about Cheyney State?
Oh, man. Oh, boy. I came of age there. I did. I really came of age. From the drama club, football, the fraternity, all of that. I mean, I really began to gain some confidence about who I am and what I'm about. I was in student government. I got to see how things work at that level. And then being a social major, we got to go places and see things. So, for instance, when Minister Farrakhan came to the college, we were the greeters and, and I was like, wow, this is Louis Farrakhan. Wow. And they showed up with these Fleetwood Cadillacs and pulled up on campus. Kent State shooting happened when those students at Kent State were shot. And I just remember the shock that our own soldiers would fire on college students. And our fear is if they would shoot at a white school like that, what would they do here if they came here? Folks were saying we need to go and show solidarity. They had buses that were leaving for Ohio and to show solidarity. Got drafted, hoping I didn't have to go to war, which turns out I did not have to go. But I had to report to the station and, they took all our clothes and gave us fatigues and to let us know that, you're going to be representing the greatest army in the world type thing. There was just so much that happened at Cheyney and to see the activities, to be a part of all that, to hang out with the guys and to be on the yard, and it couldn't get no better than that. It really couldn't.
You are on a historically black campus during the early 1970s, which is an incredibly exciting time in the rise of black consciousness.
Absolutely.
What did that mean for you? And did you get caught up in your place in society and what that meant to be a black man in America? Oh,
yeah. That first thing, I need to change my name. That's the first thing. I have to go from Donald Taylor to Donald X. It was one of the first things I had to do. I had to get rid of Taylor. It was a slave name. X indicating that if we don't know where we come from, so I'm going to be Donald X. I went home and I told my mom, she was there, so how are things going at school? I said, well, I've gotten rid of the slave name Taylor. I'm now X. And she had the biggest laugh. And I thought she would take it way more seriously than that. And I was like, I'm not eating any more pork, no more bacon, no more sausage, all of that. And what was she fixing that day? Okay. So, and while that didn't last very long, the ex didn't, but the ideology began to take root. And I began to recognize that I can be very proud of who I am and where we come from and what we're about. There were some things that people would just take advantage of the moment and do things and then chalk it up to being Black power.
So in changing your name and thinking about changing your diet, were you a member of the nation?
No way. It just seemed it was too much work. You had to dress up every day, be in the barbershop every week. You had to wear a shirt and tie and jacket. You have to do the Muhammad Speaks newsletter. I didn't want to do that much work. I just wanted to be Donald X and wear my multicolored skull cap. Okay. And I was going to be at least a symbolic brother of the nation, but not a real brother of the nation.
Don, you graduated from Cheyney State.
Mm-hmm.
What happened next?
Well, when I left Cheyney, I was trying to find a job, and I ended up meeting someone who knew someone who lived in Ohio. And they said, we know that there's a job in Ohio if you want to go to Ohio. Okay, I'm not working. I'll go to Ohio, and went to Lorain, Ohio, and I got hired in at Ford Motor Company, putting cars together. There I was, 10 hours, 12 hours a night, putting 4 or 5 bolts in a bumper. It was boring. Thought the cars were beautiful, but I was never in my mind, I would never be able to afford to drive one. After a while, I just started getting into trouble on the job. I didn't like it. The money was good. There was no question about it. The money was good. And one of the older gentlemen once said to me, he's like, young blood, you need to go back to school and get an education because you clearly don't know how to do this. Because I would look up, Mark, and I would see the floor where all the suits were. And I was like, how do I get up there? I want to be up there. I don't want to be down here. It's stinky. It's hot. And the line it's one of those perpetual, it's always going, it never stops. And oh man, I hated it. So I decided that maybe I do need to start looking into school because this is not working. I've been fired maybe 4 or 5 times, rehired 4 or 5 times, and they were putting me on increasingly less important jobs to the point where I was just simply emptying railroad cars of tires. Just put on a pair of gloves and pick up a tire, just throw it out.
With your college education.
Yeah, with my college degree. That's exactly right. So it didn't work out. And so I was very blessed to have a chance to go on to graduate school.
And in fact, you earned a master's degree in social administration from Case Western University.
Right.
And what happened after you earned your master's degree?
Well, after I got my master's, I was already working at a hospital. And I just simply kept the job at that point. But I wanted to try some very different type of experiences. And one of the things, we had a locked psychiatric unit at the hospital. And I asked, could I get transferred up to the locked unit? And they were like, really? Nobody asked to go up there. I said, yeah, I really would like to try it out and understand psychological disorders. I understood some of from school, but I really would like to really push myself and see what else is up there. And so they transferred me. And I worked up there for a couple of years. And I learned so much about art therapy, music therapy, about the ability to diagnose mental disorders, the importance of correct diagnostic work and workups, assessments and that sort of thing. So I left there and asked, could I work in the emergency room? And I want the weekend shift. I would like to go Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. I'm figuring that's where all the action is going to be. And it was. The psychiatric action in there boy, I learned how to do triage, and it was just exciting as could be. I was exhausted when it was over, but wow, the things I learned in terms of looking at mental disorders, the needs of medication, and all the things that go along with that. I wasn't sure where I was going to go with it, but I did know I liked being in a med-surg unit and doing that sort of thing.
And that led to a career in human services in which you did clinical work in mental health, child welfare, couples and families, domestic and sexual violence, but you ultimately focused on manhood issues. What do you mean by manhood issues?
Manhood issues to me are those issues that, from a sociological place, are really about roles and role expectations. What is it that a man is supposed to do? A man is not supposed to be frightened. A man is not supposed to allow anything to get in the way of his dominance. A man is supposed to be on top of things. And as a result of that, there are a lot of behaviors that come along with those role expectations. And one of them was that I will control you. You will do what I say because I'm the man in this relationship. As I tell folks all the time, I've done work in families I work with, and I have young mothers who refer to their 3-year-olds as my little man. That's my man. That's my little man. Or a 5-year-old who's the man of the house. And you think about what are all the issues? And I told him, I said, one of the things I had to examine was my own use of that type of manhood expectation. When my sons fell off their bike, I treated and behaved one way. When my daughter fell off her bike, I treated and behaved a different way. My boys fell off the bike. Get up. You're okay. You're not hurt. And they're crying. No, they're fine. They're fine. Their mother would say, down there, no, they're fine. You're my son. Get up. You're riding this bike. My daughter will fall, and I will pick the bike up and throw it. You never have to ride a bike again, as far as I'm concerned. And you think to yourself, well, what does that mean down the road? What are some of the messages I'm giving him and my daughter at such a young age? And I'm right here. Their dad is right here. People will say, well, you didn't have a father around. Well, I was right there. As a result, as I talk to these guys, I say, come to a place to recognize that some of these issues are issues that grow out of the context of institutional expectations. As a result of that, some men believe it's their right to control their house, period. And I want to be able to say, how can I help you see how much more richer things could be in your life if it wasn't about control, but about equality? Doesn't mean you go along with everything she says. And that's because that's the question I would get all the time. Oh, so now I'm just going to be a little punk and I'm not going to, I'm going to listen to everything. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. When I talk about equality, I talk about being able to hear each other's opinion. How do you do that? And then you make a decision. How many times as a man have you made a decision and then later wish you had just listened to your wife's advice in the first place? I said, now that's happened to me many times.
Don, you do group work with men.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like? What do we see in the room? Who's in the room? And what is it that you do?
Young men are in the room. Middle-aged and older men are in the room. Reverends, police officers, teachers are in the room. At times, you'll find themselves jockeying for some type of position because I am this outside of this room. But in here, we're all peers. How do we deal with that? You're all here for the same reason. One of the things I say frequently in the room, we didn't go find you. Your behavior found us. Okay? And because of that, you're sitting here. All right? And as a man, I want you to be able to be accountable for your behavior. What is that accountability? Now, there's no question that in this room, you have guys that are saying things that they hope will garner attention and respect from other guys. Like, man, what are you going to do? I'm not going to have no woman just punk me. That's just not going to happen. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So you get all that. And for me, it's about being able to confront that head on and going straight into what I consider to be the mouth of the lion. And let's talk about that. Why do you think talking with your woman will punk you?
It's interesting the language you use, your woman, because that's language that seems possessive of women.
Good point. And, while I do say it, and I've said it many times, I'm trying to pass on this feeling that this is a person you're supposed to love. This is a person that if I said to her the things you said to her, what would you do? If I approached your woman the way you approach your woman, what would you do to me? Man, I'll be in prison right now. Then help me understand why it's not different for you. And that's when we make the move from your woman. So what's her name again? Okay, and the idea is, I love to teach them. I tell them this all the time. Take this from old gray beard. When you go home, call your woman by her name. All right, Debbie, I'm glad to see you. I missed you today. Don't say boo, honey, sweetie, snookums. Call her by her name, because it also humanizes her. And a lot of times we men may not be talking about our women in ways that are that. And I'm going to pay closer attention to that thanks to you.
Don, you did this work for many years. Mm-hmm. How did you find your way to Charlotte?
A friend of mine got a job down here. It was a snowstorm in Cleveland. And he said he was in Charlotte and it was like 45 degrees and he had on a sweater and I should come down and check it out. So I did.
Don, in the 1990s, you had your own individual practice. And something happened in Charlotte which led to an opportunity for you. What was that and what happened?
Well, there was a shooting of a man. His daughter was in the back seat. I think she was 4 years old at the time, and he was shot and killed. The baby was not injured. And the city was right on the edge of a powder keg. And at that time, the county commissioners, I think Parks Helms and some of the folks who were here at the time were thinking maybe it'd be a good time for us to talk about race in this community and maybe it'll take the temperature down. And the very first community building task force took place at Foundation for the Carolinas. And then I had a chance to meet Diane English. At that time, I couldn't figure out what could I learn how to do? What is there as a black man? What is there for me to have to talk about? That type of thing. And to come find out as this task force grew, I realized how little I really understood about race, racism, institutionality, and those types of things from another point of view. I knew my lens fairly well. But to hear other points of view, there were times I would sit in the room, Mark, and my jaw would be dropped open like, wow, I would have never thought about that. And there were some very tense moments. And one of the things that I learned working with Diane is how to measure your response to some of those things. And at the same time, keep the conversation moving forward. I actually believe that very facilitation helped me as a facilitator in my classroom. So we were just going around the county and having these groups. There was a larger task force that was formed. I don't quite remember who was in charge at the time, but we really had begun to build something that I thought maybe we had pushed this back. And of course, 2016 happened and boom, the keg we thought that we had averted actually did erupt.
Don, you teach, you write, you play music. What matters most to you?
Being intentional and not feeling locked in my lane, so to speak. I think what matters to me is being able to know that things I do intentionally. I teach with everything I've got intentionally. I don't do it by accident. I don't say, oh my goodness, I had a good class today. Boy, whatever I did, I've got to do it again. No, this is all intentional. No more of this sitting on the water like a leaf and going wherever the water takes me, and then every now and then I come up with a great idea to cheat the cosmos and I do something. No, I didn't like living like that. I like being able to say, I am the master of my fate. And, I listened to that. I must have said Invictus. I don't know how many times I've said that to myself. That poem has such power for me. And I've learned it when I was in college, and I know it without even thinking about it, just to know that so much happens that we tend to not be intentional about it. We tend to think, well, what can you do? What can you do? That's the way things are. And I say, no, that's just part of the equation. It is the way things are. But if you live in an intentional way, then things that happen because on some level, you did what needed to be done. All right, I want to play the horn. Well, to be intentional, I need to practice. I'm not going to learn to play the horn with it sitting there, be in a place where I hang my clothes. I have to spend the hours I spend practicing, writing the music down note by note, one by one, and then playing it over and over and over again. To write a book, you got to get up there and write. I know some of you say, boy, I've always wanted to write a book. Well, it certainly is not going to write by itself. And you know that you've written a book. You know it doesn't write itself. You got to find the time. People say, oh, I just don't have time. Well, you got to find the time. I don't know where I find the time to practice. When I leave here today, I've got to practice. I've got a gig at the end of the week, 2 of them. And I've got to get in some practice. But I think living in an intentional way, that's what matters to me. I'm intentional. When our students come to me and there are tears in their eyes and they're, I don't know what to do. I don't, professor, can I talk to you? Can you help me? To me, that's what intentionality does. I think it draws people to say, how do I get a piece of that? What do I need to do to feel a part of this moment with this person right here, right now? In our classes, yours, mine, students come out of that with this, wow. They'll tell me, well, I went to Professor Perez and he talks about some of the same things you talked about. It wraps them up. And I just find that being an intentional person has really changed my life.
Thank you for your time today, Don.
Hey, thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
Don Taylor is an assistant professor of sociology. He earned a bachelor's degree in political science at Cheyney State College and a master's degree in social administration from Case Western University. And now, a personal word. Don Taylor made me laugh when he told his story of becoming Donald X when he was a student at Cheyney State College in the early 1970s. I laughed because of the way he told the story, because it had become humorous to him. But the point he made about black folk bearing the names of former slave masters is not funny at all. There's an article I read entitled, Hey Black America, Let's Ditch Our Slave Names, by Zarin Burnett III. Burnett asks, what if all black Americans went to the courthouse on the same day and changed their last name as a great act of protest? He writes, it would be a massive act of freedom for black America. It would force the nation to confront the legacy of slavery. Most white people in America have never considered what it means to walk around with the name of the family that once owned your family. In the online article, Burnett includes a video clip of Malcolm X answering questions from a panel of white journalists. I suspect the interview was recorded around 1964. The journalist asks Malcolm X what his, quote, real name was before he changed it. Malcolm responds that he didn't know what his real name was, and neither did his father or grandfather. Malcolm says the real names of our people were destroyed during slavery. Burnett adds this comment: a century and a half after the end of slavery, and I'm still identifying with the name of the slave owner who once owned my family. That's a bone-deep pain, one hidden and held in the letters of my last name. Think about that. No, for real, think about that. If you aren't black, you may have never considered what it means to walk around carrying the mark of your family's slave master. If you think about it too much and too deeply, it'll fuck you up. That's probably why many, if not most, black Americans never think about it. Not really. It's just too dark and too visceral and too real to consciously remember that every day when you put your name on something, you're extending the reach of your former slave master. During the Black consciousness movement of the 1960s and 70s, many black Americans abandoned their slave names, adopted newly chosen names, at least for a short time, and more fully embraced their black heritage. Permanently abandoning long-established names for many black Americans became complicated. But, as Don noted, heightened black consciousness remained. I imagine Don Taylor feels as I do, that becoming X means more than changing one's name. Becoming X also means becoming all that one can be, freely and intentionally. That's the true work that Don and I are involved in as educators and colleagues. We are in the business of helping students realize their potential, no matter their starting point in life. We are in the business of identity and possibility formation. No one does it better than Don. There is a song called Becoming X by a British trip-hop band called Sneaker Pimps. Trip-hop is a down-tempo fusion of hip-hop and electronica with elements of funk, soul, R&B, and house music. Think 1990s electronic psychedelic tempo. As one comment online noted, think dark, futuristic 90s dope. Becoming X has these lyrics. Close my eyes, can you still see me? Obsolete. Very nearly something to see. See me. Becoming X is shedding into something new. It is this metamorphosis. It is becoming very nearly something to see until one is seen. I think of Don Taylor in the classroom. You should see him. He raises his voice, he moves around the room, he confronts, he challenges, he says the most provocative things. And his students love him. They love him because he is real. They love him because he entertains. They love him because he believes in them. If there is a point to this life, it is in the alchemy of it. Don Taylor has transformed his life, and he transforms those he meets. His words, his music, his name. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners, and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website on lifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.